Hello and welcome. This is Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders and the Netherlands. My name is Sarah Tekert and my guest for today is Dr. Sietske Dijkstra. She is a psychologist and was working at the University of Utrecht for 10 years in the field of women's studies, specifically domestic violence, sexual abuse, and its long-term consequences. She holds a PhD since the year 2000 and a Master of Arts since June 2021. She is a professional researcher and teacher with the focus on the topics of violation, relational safety and trauma, for which she has created several courses for professionals. In the year 1998, she has founded the Dijkstra Agency that researches, among others, domestic violence, gender-based violence, intervention, and high conflict divorce. She worked since 2007 for almost 8 years as a lecturer, as a professor in applied science on domestic violence and interagency cooperation. Furthermore, Dr. Sietske Dijkstra was an appointed member of the Commission Samson in the Netherlands that was investigating sexual abuse of children in residential and foster care since 1945, and the question how these experiences link with the issue of adoption. Welcome, Dr. Sietske Dijkstra. In one of our preparation meetings for this podcast, we spoke about existential trauma. Could you please explain what that is and how it is connected to Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen?
Hello, Sarah. Thanks for the invitation. I think your first question about existential trauma is already a very important one. There are different kinds of trauma. Also, a singular event, such as a car accident, can cause trauma. But existential trauma means that it deeply affects the biography of a person and that they will probably carry it with them for their entire life. This is why the term of existential trauma is such a good fit for the situation of Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen, as well as adopted children, as it indeed does affect their entire life. Due to the fact that it was also not possible to talk about it in the past, it is a very scary, impactful, and horrible experience. Very often the mothers tried to oppose this, but they were powerless and felt overruled. Also, the babies that were born experienced this emotionally, physically, and mentally, as well as the mothers who were forced to give up their babies. And this leads us to the core experience of trauma, namely the feeling of being powerless and overwhelmed in a situation which strongly affects a person and their life.
The traumatizing events that happened to the women and the children took place a long time ago. Why is it so important to make clear that in these cases, time does not heal all the wounds?
It is a popular thing to say that time can heal wounds, but this is also what I already responded to in my first question. An existential trauma is something that is hidden. It is a dark chapter in one's personal history, which sometimes lasted for decades. In addition to that, it was a professional system. There was never a real chance to process it, which means the trauma was stored inside with mental, emotional, and physical effects. It can even cause changes in someone's brain. The experiences of a person were not really given any language, and nonetheless, they kept living on within this person. This is why it is so important for the society to pay attention to this and to change their perspective of how they react to it. Also, we need to point out that for a very long time, this was an often used procedure among the society. It wasn't a singular event that one woman had to give up her baby. It was systematized on a very large scale, with the approval of the authorities. In the case of trauma and collective trauma, it is common that acknowledgement and recognition is demanded by the victims. The women felt like nobody listened to them. They were overwhelmed, and the babies themselves surely had no saying in this at all. And still, it happened to them. In order to switch that and to acknowledge it, it is important to properly listen and to apologize for the experiences of being overruled and powerless, and of not being seen and heard. Nonetheless, internationally, we can also see that this process often takes a long time. There is a large gap between injustice that has happened and the acknowledgement and the apologies.
In the context of the Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen, the term institutional violence is used, referring to the structure this entire system was based on. Could you please explain what that is?
Yes, of course. Due to my work experience regarding violence in families and relationships, as well as my research position at the Samson Commission in the Netherlands, which was focused on sexual abuse of children in residential and foster care from 1945, I became more aware that institutional violence exists. The children that were taken from their homes and were brought into institutes were often vulnerable and had lived in dangerous or harmful conditions. There was violence, drug addiction, or their parents had psychological problems. These children were an easy prey for abusers. The Commission Samson had found that the amount of abuse within the institutions was 2.5 times higher than in the average population. This means that the children which were put into residential or foster care in order to be protected from the abuse were then abused inside of the system. The intention was to protect them, but they were not safe there at all. Institutional violence comes more and more into focus these days, for example in Canada, with Indigenous children in children's homes. These children were forced to deny their roots and their culture and were punished if they didn't obey. Therefore, an important factor of institutional violence is the power of institutions which legitimized the behavior. And this is something what we also see with the Afstandsmoeders and their children. From the perspective of the society, what the authorities did was legit, as the girls and women who had sex before their marriage and who got pregnant were understood as bad people, who needed a strong leadership in order to recover and to not cause any more shame. At the same time, the relationships they had with their boyfriends or later even husbands were never inspected to determine whether they were potentially capable of raising a child. This means there were certain normative ideas among society of how to deal with these women and girls, and these normative ideas were professionally legitimized. During the investigation of the Commission Samson, we also learned that professionals who dealt with girls that were abused in their own families or in foster families believed that there was some sort of professional risk to them. As the girls were overly sexualized, they believed that further crossing of professional boundaries was to be expected. These ideas created a sort of smokescreen which was very difficult to be seen through. Regarding the link of institutional violence, sexual abuse, and adoption, is that when the women opposed and they claimed to keep their children, to raise their children by themselves, nobody listened to them. They felt completely ignored, which is something that we can also see in history of cases of sexual and/or physical abuse. Many children and teenagers did speak up and wanted to talk about their experiences, but when they did so, they were punished again as people did not believe them, or they were put into families where they got abused again. To sum it up, institutional violence isolates people and deprives them of being seen and heard, while at the same time they were overruled by the authorities who were in charge. And this is why it is so important to focus on institutional violence as well as on violence within families and relationships, as it is still happening all over the world.
Veel meer aan de kaak te stellen, omdat het op allerlei plekken in de wereld speelt.
In the case of the Afstandsmoeders, why did it take so long for society to notice that what was happening there was wrong?
Ja, dat raakt aan
This is also linked to my previous explanations of normative ideas, and probably this question needs an investigation itself too, which adoption experts might have done already. But this long duration of time that it takes to start accusing the injustice that has been done can also be seen in the Canadian children's homes, where recently dead bodies of Indigenous children have been found. Many children have died in these children's homes, but the fact that these professional standards and ideas that legitimize those standards did exist made it possible for such procedures to continue for such a long time. For example, my colleague Lynn-Marie Sardinia has done international research in 46 countries about ideas regulating gender and gender-related violence. And she found out that ideas such as a woman owes her husband sex if he wants it, or a woman is only there to raise a child, or a woman needs to cook for her husband, were used as legitimations by men to beat their wives when they refused to follow these ideas. Even further, these ideas can go so far that they are supported by the entire society. This means in the Netherlands, people had a certain idea of young, unmarried, pregnant women, and they felt empowered to deal with them in a way they felt was necessary. Therefore, the fact that things have been done this way for such a long time also means that it takes an equally long time for people to realize that this was wrong.
In which way can the current investigation, but also the media attention, be re-traumatizing for the Afstandsmoeders and the children?
Retraumatisation, which means being traumatized again, is fairly easy possible when the consciousness did not manage to catch up in growth and when the acknowledgement was not sufficient. Recently, a report has been published by independent experts which speaks of a break of trust. Back then, the young women went to authorities in hope to receive help and support, but instead, their trust was broken. Furthermore, being re-traumatized can also happen by so-called parallel processes, which I will explain later on. But we can even see these old patterns in the current discussion about racism and slavery. And in how long they still take. This shows how slow authorities understand and accept their own mistakes, and which also leads to only very slow changes.
You have already mentioned the term parallel process. Could you please explain what that is, and why do we need understanding of these parallel processes in the cases of Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen?
Het woord parallel proces komt denk ik uit de systeem.
I believe the term parallel processes comes from the system therapy, and we use it to show that there is a parallel between the experience in the past and the current situation. For example, in the past, the Afstandsmoeders had no saying, even though they wanted to keep their child. Their resistance had no effect, And also the fact that they sometimes were not even able to hold their child made them feel extremely powerless and humiliated. On the other hand, Afstandskinderen and children that were adopted might have the feeling that they were not worth being held or being held onto. My mother didn't want to take care of me and I was just given up. These deep feelings were imprinted into the lives of Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen, and in the current days, there can be situations that trigger these feelings again. Experts also sometimes call these situations triggers. In these moments, people feel again like they are not being heard, they are powerless, or they are being overruled by other people who are in charge of the person's life without paying attention to their experience. Therefore, we have to pay more attention to parallel processes that can trigger afstandmoeders and their children. We need to co-work in hierarchical equality instead of, as it is happening currently, that one party leads and the others follow. We need to empower the afstandsmoeders and the adoptees by giving them equal positions in order to rebuild the trust that has been broken in the past.
Could you please give some examples for such triggers in daily life?
The examples I have just given show that the person can again get the feeling that their voice and their opinion don't matter, and that other people take decisions away from them. So it would be possible to say that we have to take an ever closer look into how power structures have worked in the past, and then we need to critically ask ourselves how this is done now. We need a switch of power, and we need to give room to the experience of the afstandmoeders and the afstandskinderen. And we as professionals have to listen even deeper and better. In conventional research, we interview them with a list of questions. We are still in the leading position of the situation. But we need to ask ourselves if it wasn't better to actually give a voice to the people who have had these experiences in the past and to give them an equal space in our investigation.
In our preparation meeting, you told me that even the misspelling of a name in a report or in the media can be such a trigger for an Afstandsmoeder or an Afstandskind. Why is this such a big deal for a traumatized person, as it seems like a minor thing?
In the history of afstandsmoeders, but mainly of afstandskinderen and adoptees, we can often see that they were often given a new name by their adoptive parents. And the fact that a name is misspelled, and I have also seen this at the Commission Samson, means that the person gets reminded again of their experiences, their story, and the long way they have come, and that they have to face this all over again. Then they need to explain again how humiliated and abandoned they have felt in the past. That for a long time they didn't know who their biological family was, and that means they have to make themselves vulnerable again. If important facts in your documentation are either wrong or won't get corrected accordingly, because of course mistakes can always happen, then it is important to give the person the opportunity to check this information first, before it is given to the investigators. In situations like this, we cannot be careful enough, because every mistake signals to the traumatized person again, I am not worth it. Again, people are not listening to me. Also, we know that for the recovery from a trauma, it is important for the person to feel empowered and to feel that they are able to connect with others in order to claim their rightfully strong position in the world again.
Dit soort processen heel zorgvuldig moeten inrichten.
Eugenie Smits van Waarsbergen named the experience of the Afstandsmoeders and the Afstandskinderen a collective wound. Do you feel like this description is accurate?
Ja, ik denk het feit dat
Yes, I think the fact that she uses this term shows that she sees certain patterns in the group of Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen very clearly. The term trauma is Greek and means wound, and this is why we speak of a collective wound, because that's what it is for Afstandsmoeders, Afstandskinderen and the adoptees.
soms ook de later geadopteerden.
Do you feel like the collective trauma also affects the group of Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen themselves and the way how they interact with each other?
Ja, dat denk ik zeker. En dit is ook een
Yes, I think this for sure. It is also a very sensitive topic. Furthermore, it is a topic that wasn't sufficiently spoken about and that can itself trigger emotions of not being heard or not being seen. The Afstandmoeders might feel that in the eyes of the Afstandskinderen and the adoptees, they are not enough. At the same time, the Afstandskinderen and adoptees can feel left alone or abandoned by their biological mother or parents again. This way, they all have different positions in this scenario. The Afstandskinderen were only babies, and the Afstandsmoeders were young adults. Also, there can be conflicts between the people in the group who speaks up in the public and those in the background who often might have tried to erase these experiences from their life. They can often feel overwhelmed as they have never given this experience as much thought as the others might have. These different positions can cause many conflicts within the group of the same people, as not everybody is on the same page.
dezelfde positie daarin inneemt.
Is the group lacking a safe space?
Ja, veiligheid is wel echt een kernwoord, hè, Sarah?
Safety is indeed a very important aspect, also in childcare. At the same time, there is something what we can call unsafety. Some forms of unsafety can already be seen from the distance, like, for example, physical or sexual abuse. But the experiences which have never really got a chance to be processed and which now cause biochemical processes in the person's body, as well as affecting their emotions, can also cause the feeling of unsafety. This way, also the relationship between Afstandmoeders, Afstandskinderen and adoptees can be a complicated one because of all the different positions they have. This can cause another parallel process where people feel wronged again, or they can feel that as Afstandmoeders, they are now confronted with all the pain and anger again, even though they had no chance in the past and had no saying in their own life or about the life that grew inside of them.
En ook niet over het leven wat groeide in mijn buik.
Is the problem of institutional violence more difficult to solve than violence in families, for example?
Ja, dat is ik vind een hele interessante vraag, Sarah, die je voorlegt.
This is a very interesting question. I'm not really able to answer it because also the approach of investigating violence within families is rather short. By now it is roughly 50 years. There is this saying, spare the rod and spoil the child. And in the past, there was very often the idea that a strict regime was necessary to bring up a child. I'm not sure if one type of violence is worse than the other, but thanks to the Commission Samson, I understood that institutional violence is still happening all over the world. We see it in the newspapers regularly. One example are the cases of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. The large scale on which this was happening and how helpless the victims were to achieve justice shows really well why institutional violence is rather difficult to solve compared to the violence within the families. Within a violent family, there is always a chance to escape somehow or to reach out to a third party to ask for help, such as teacher or another family member, for example, who do believe them. With institutional violence, this is not possible. We have seen this at the Commission Samson, and I think it was also the case with the Afstandsmoeders, that women and children who already were part of this large-scale system and who tried to reach out for help within the system were simply ignored and were not taken seriously. This is why institutional violence, in which the victims have no chance to escape, nobody listens to their complaints, and their resistance is pointless, is so difficult to tackle. Therefore, it is crucial to also pay attention to the structures of why this could have happened.
What are things that the Dutch state could do in its current investigation in order to not re-traumatize the Afstandsmoeders and the Afstandskinderen?
Ja, dat is een grote en ook een specifieke vraag waarin ik eigenlijk niet details
This is actually a big topic, but also a very specific question, and I am not able to specifically answer to that, considering that I am not involved in the current investigation. But nonetheless, also based on the report that I have mentioned and what I have said earlier, it can be said that acknowledgement is crucial, as well as an investigation that gives the Afstandmoeders, Afstandskinderen, and adoptees an equal position. We have seen this at the Commission Samson, and I believe it is the same with the Afstandmoeders and their children, that it is important to take a good critical look at the way they are treated within the investigation. We need to be careful to create a cooperation that is based on equality in order to also focus our processes on the experiences that have been made.
In which way could the Dutch society now learn from their mistakes regarding how they dealt with the victims of institutional violence?
Ja, dat is een brede vraag.
This is a very complex topic as well, but I am sure that it can be said that more apologies and more acknowledgement of what has gone wrong would be really helpful. Instead of constantly trying to stay in charge, rather try to understand. Also, compensation can be an important factor, even financially, but also as a face-to-face conversation with an apology for what has happened and with actual attention to the experience of the person. Furthermore, it is important to not divide the group into experts and victims, but to create a group based on equality, which would derive benefits from the expertise of the experiences that have been made. It is crucial to be open about the mistakes that have been made and the opinions of how to restore them. That way, more equal relationships are built and we create a scenario where mistakes can be addressed and it will be possible to find a solution for them together.
What can we do to create more awareness for institutional violence and what can we do against it?
Ja, eerder heb ik al over normatieve opvattingen
Previously, I have spoken about normative ideas and the research of my colleague Lynn-Marie Sardinia. For example, when a woman hasn't prepared the food for her husband or she refuses sex, and that authorizes him to beat her. This is a pattern of justification that we need to question and to deconstruct in order to see what lies underneath it. Furthermore, we need to critically look at the attitude, also within other issues, of scenarios of power positions of professionals towards victims. We need to make sure that the treatment and the attitude are correct. This cannot be a scenario where one person believes they know it better than the other. Together, they need to reflect, and together they need to work on the mutual core values. A core value of the adaptation dossier is the acknowledgement of what has gone wrong, but also the empowerment for what is necessary to restore the mistakes, if possible, or what's necessary to avoid them in the future. It is crucial to look at the power structures underneath and to change them. As I said previously, at the Commission Samson we learned that children were taken from their biological families in order to protect them. But then they were put into a system where they were not safe either, where they were abused again by other foster children or by staff members. We also need to look at the power position of professionals who, even though they may have good intentions, do things that are not okay, but put their clients into a position of powerlessness again, instead of protecting them or empowering them. These are issues that I believe will get a lot of attention in the following years.
Dr. Sietske Dijkstra, thank you very much.
Graag gedaan, Sarah. Dank je voor de invitatie.
You're welcome, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for listening. This was Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. If you like this podcast, please feel free to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast. If you want to support our cause, please share this podcast in your social media to reach the utmost attention for the injustice that has been done to Afstandsmoeders and their children in the Netherlands and all over the world. Thank you very much and have a great day.